Okay, the goal, now that I have my photo reference, right, and my style inspirations, and then you might just look up certain artists, like Alice Neal's paintings look like this. I did a little screen grab of just the coloring in that face, which is fun. So it's more playful. It's something, it's looser than photorealistic painting. That's what I'm interested in trying, right? So now I am going to open it up in Photoshop. So I go to Adobe Photoshop, and I'm going to create a new file. And the very minimum it needs to be is 8 by 10 by 300 pixels per inch. But we're going to be doing all this work creating all of our own pixels. There's no compositing in digital painting, right? Instead, we just use images as reference. So I might as well make it bigger, as long as my computer can handle it. So I'm going to call this Karl. Always name your files with your name, so that you can find them if they get misplaced. This is assignment number 7. And this is a digital painting of my partner. Right, now the size in inches, I'm going to make it 11 by 14. And if you're doing an animal, maybe the animal is longer than they are tall, so you want to do it, wider than it is tall, but it needs to be at least 8 by 10, and I'm going to do it by my studio resolution, which is 350 pixels per inch. There we go. I can always check that with image size. That will save me heartaches later. So it's 11 by 14. I can also see it in the bottom corner. It's 11 by 14 at 350 pixels per inch. Now what do? I'm going to bring in my reference images. I'm going to bring in my photo reference. Right. And then I'm going to shrink it so it's off to the corner. Put that up at the top right, because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, it's good to put your reference to the top left. So it's easy to look at it and be informed by it. Then I'm going to bring in some of the painting reference. I liked kind of the simplicity of this paint style. Well, that artist is linked. And then some of my other inspirations. Some of these AI games. And maybe I'll run that just along the top. And maybe for ease, I'll put this on the bottom. Whoops. Okay, now I'm going to organize my layers. This is very different than digital coloring, and it's not as organized. But one thing is you always want a blank white background, because you can replace it later with another background. And you want to lock that, just like white bread in digital coloring. So never paint on that. That's why I lock it. Next, I'm going to take all my reference images, and I'm going to put them into a folder. Select them all, click on the folder icon, call these references, and then lock those. Because I might want to steal color from them, but otherwise I just want to look at them. Right? And then next, I'm going to start with what's called my sketch. So I'm going to use a brush and the brush tool, and I'm going to use a standard brush first just to make sure everything's working. I'm going to use the hard round pressure brush just like I have when I've done drawing or sketches. I'm going to set it to a pretty large size, like just under 100 pixels, because to me that's the size of a pencil eraser. And then the hard round pressure size means that if I touch really lightly, it's just with black right now, then it's going to be a pretty thin mark. And if I press harder, it's going to be fuller, right? Now I'm going to turn smoothing all the way down for this. I had it turned on for digital inking. So now when I make those marks, they're a lot more immediate. And all those different kind of marks I can make. And I'm going to make a bunch of scribbles and get used to this. How reactive this can be. Then I'm going to show you how I can turn these scribbles into my custom brush. Ooh. Because I want everyone to know how to make a custom brush. Whether you use it for your project or not, it's important that you know how to make one. So when I design a brush, I basically do this, and I do it at a 45-degree angle. And I always put a little bit of, for digital painting, a little bit of detritus on the side, like a little bit of little garbage offshoots to help blending. But this is like what's called a bristle brush in oil painting. It's made of pig's hair. It's really, really sharp and pretty open, right? It's not like a watercolor brush, which is much more solid. Now, this is what I do. I'm going to take my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to grab that layer, kind of make a box around it, and copy it, Command-C. And then I'm going to say File, New, and then call this Karl Brush, and say Create, and then paste that brush in. Right? This is all you need to create a brush in Photoshop. Then I'm going to go to Edit, and I say Define Brush Preset. And now I have a brush that's named Karl Brush at a pretty high resolution. Woohoo, there it is. Now let me show you how I try this out. So, if I use this brush on my background, because it's such a high resolution, if I just tap once, it fills in that whole brush. But if I paint with it, it just repeats itself over and over again. So how do I make it more like the brush I need? Well, first of all, I can play with the size of it, right? Notice that when you do custom brushes, you can't play with the hardness because the hardness is built into the brush. Some parts are hard, some parts are soft. So now if I put it more like a pencil eraser, right? Notice that it's also not pressure sensitive. So I have to build all of that into that, but I do like the kind of softness it has. So this is how we customize our brush. It's not so much with the shape of it, because this shape is the custom one I drew, right? Rather, it's with the brush settings. So you go to Window, and you go to Brush Settings. Here they are, and you'll see them in your sidebar. And the ones that I like most, that are most important, are Shape Dynamics. Shape Dynamics allow you to control it with pen pressure. So now all of a sudden, it can be thick, it can be thin, right? But the problem is, it's still always locked at the same angle. So if I just do it once, it's good, but then if I repeat it, it just looks like a marker, right? So the next shape dynamic that's really important is the angle jitter. You can see it changing. That will change the angle of the brush as I use it, and that will keep its edges always soft. So this is a really good kind of sketching brush. It's kind of a good all-purpose brush. And for now, that's really all I need. I can jitter the roundness a little bit, which can give me a little bit more variety, which I like. And that's about it. That's just with shape dynamics. When I'm finishing it off, and the way we saw some of the artists use stippling and stuff with their brush, I can play with what's called the texture settings. And I could set it to be more contrasted or less contrasted, more depth or less depth, right? Play with the scale of it and kind of add textures into it. And I can pick the texture. I usually use a water texture. So this is kind of a finishing brush, right? Which will give me these kind of textural notes. There we go. And that's all from the same brush head. So this is me playing with it. And I haven't even played with colors yet, right? So I'm going to turn off texture for now. But remember those, right? And now I'm going to go back to my original. And I'm going to delete that sketch. And now I'm going to start sketching with my new brush, right? So that's with texture turned on. You see how that's a really good kind of pencil? So I can sketch with that. And it's also pressure sensitive for size. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And now I'm just going to sketch in. So one way you can sketch is to just try to get your shapes, figure out where the eye line is. I used to teach, and you'll find my tutorial videos will give you the whole breakdown for portraiture. But I'm going to let this be a little bit more experimental. And today's just about finding your subject matter and setting it up in Photoshop. But I'm also going to show you a handy advantage that digital art has for getting proportions and layout and the precise placement of portraiture, right? So right now I am just doing what you would with a pencil sketch. And I'm kind of roughing things in, trying to see the angles. And I'm not erasing anything. I think the eraser is one of the more useless tools in Photoshop. Because I'm interested in the energy of my own mark making to kind of dictate the process here. And that big shape of the glasses, the angle of the neck, how that goes into the shoulder. And I know I'm at a plenty high resolution, so I can float everything in the middle. I can always crop its edges later. And this is kind of my quick rough-in sketch. Right? Now, what a lot of people like to do is underneath their sketch, they like to pick a base color. So now I'm going to turn the texturing off my brush, right? Which makes it more solid. And instead of black, I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to steal this kind of rusty red color. And I'm going to paint that as a base. This is an oil painting technique. You give yourself an earth tone underneath everything. And I can vary that earth tone a little bit. My brush is at 100% right now, so it's just taking the colors exactly as they are. But I'll show you how I can then smudge them together and use them in different ways. So I can block out kind of rough colors for darks, for shadows like around the hairline. One thing I like about the AI version of your photo reference is it will exaggerate your contrast and your highlights, just so they're easier to recognize, like the bright red lips, right? And this is all just painting at 100%. So remember with digital coloring, I talked about the kill whitey phase. And that's all to get you to pay attention to filling in every shape so you don't have that blank white layer showing through. Well, this is a phase where you're just trying to fill in your shapes. It's not like flat coloring. You see, it's a lot more just building up. I'm trying to find kind of a color palette for the skin that's a little bit more experimental. I want purples and blues in there. For the clothing, I want it to have a lot of energy. For the light on her shoulder and through her hair. Make it really warm with these yellows. A little on the forehead, on the nose. Also, when I'm doing this rough sketch, and everyone, you can have your own style. A lot of you have some experience with digital painting, and you get to push it further here and experiment further. My methods just tend to be more about